This is Connie Mason. It is December the 17th, 2010, Oral History Project, interviewing Carolyn Mason today concerning the Shackleford horses. Carolyn, thank you for letting me come to your house today and on such a cold, wet, rainy day, Saturday before Christmas.
Glad to see you anytime, Connie.
It's very beautiful in here, and we'll just start out with some personal information about your parents' name and where you were born and raised.
My parents' name, my father was Lionel Salter from Marshallburg. My mother's Ann Coward of Goldsboro. I was born in Goldsboro, so I don't like to admit it, but I started out as a dingbatter. But I was in Marshallburg, safe and secure by the time before I was a year old, and I grew up there.
That's all your formative years. That's
all
good.
My formative years were spent down east.
That's good. And tell me, we're going to talk about the horses today because you've been so instrumental, if not vital, to keeping that with us. Tell me, did you always have a love of animals?
I have, and I grew up loving horses. I never had one. We never had a place that we could keep them, but when there was a drive-in down at Smyrna, and there was an East drive-in at Beaufort, I believe.
I saw it.
But anyway, before your time. But I was 5 or 6 years old, and my daddy loved Westerns, and he always took me to the movies when there were Westerns at the drive-ins. And I remember him teasing me years ago when the soldiers got shot off the horses. I didn't blink, but if a horse went down, I cried. And like I said, I read all the Black Stallion books and that kind of thing. And I asked for a pony one Christmas when I was about 7. And I got a collie from Santa, and with a note that he couldn't get a horse in his sleigh. So that was as close as I ever got, but I just have always had an affinity to animals. I think they're very innocent and very trusting spirits, and they're nice to be around.
Yeah, it kind of give you unconditional love.
Right, yeah.
And so by occupation, you became a...
Well, I was a teacher. I taught school at Chestnut Junior High in Wilmington for a year. And I was married, but I was single and no kids at the time. And I thought, well, I've got 3 months to kill. I might as well try to find a job I can work year-round and I'll make more money. And so I took a trainee position at Cherry Point as a librarian and got TAD orders. They wouldn't pay you to go to school, but they would order you to school. And you continued to get your salary. So I got state certification in library science up there, and made a career of working in military libraries, Navy and Marine Corps. Loved it.
And you learned a lot of research skills there, too.
Yes.
And what was available. And that came into play, didn't it, with your work with the horses?
Yes, it did. We were asked, one of the first things when we first dealt with the Park Service back then, we said, but these horses have been here longer than the people. They own that bank, that's theirs, and they've been here for so many generations. And what we got were crossed arms over the chest with a "Who says?" Show me in writing. Well, as you know, the history down east for its first decades of people living here and longer was an oral tradition. It was much like the Native Americans. Even in my lifetime, I grew up, before I started first grade, we lived with my grandmother, who had kerosene lamps and a pot-bellied coal heater in the house. In the kitchen was a 4-burner kerosene stove and oven. And there was no TV. So at night, before we went to bed, people sat and actually talked to each other.
That's right. Yeah.
And there'd always be a comment, well, do you remember the time that Uncle so-and-so did? Or when the sound froze over or when the horse penning happened, you know. So I grew up learning a lot about my place and neighbors and relatives from hearing my grandmother and father and mother and whoever else happened to be, and just having conversations.
Right.
Because they would give us the little girls back then. My girlfriend Claire Ann Wiggins and I would get the old Sears Roebuck catalogs and a pair of scissors, and we entertained ourselves for months cutting out paper dolls out of the Sears and Roebuck catalog. But while we were doing that, we would be listening, absorbing what the adults were saying. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the thing that's missing now. And I'm guilty. I wish we had had the time or had taken the time to sit down and just talk about people and places like my grandparents did or my grandmother did.
So when did you first learn about I think the dog, you got company coming.
Cut this off.
So when was the first time that you heard about the problem, what they were
I was
planning to do?
working, running the library at Cherry Point, and one day at the lunch break, one of my techs said, "Well, are you going to the meeting today at the Maritime Museum?" I said, "About what?" She said, "They're taking the horses off Shackleford." I said, "Are you serious?" She said, "Yes." It's in the paper. So I called my boss and I said, "I need to attend a meeting this afternoon and I'd like to sign annual leave." He said, "Go for it." So I drove down to Beaufort and went to the meeting at the Maritime Museum. And there were some park people there, and I was told later that the reason this was started at Shackleford was because the Park Service was thinking about taking the horses off Cumberland Island. But they were much more well known. You know, they knew about the Ocracoke horses, the Corolla horses on the up near Hatteras, and of course Cumberland Island is a famous resort area. Mm-hmm. But these were a little bit more of a secret. The local people know about them, and I found out later some scientists and North Carolina legislators knew about them. But you know, the scuttlebutt I got was that they wanted to test it here to see if there was what happened, to see if they wanted to do it at Cumberland Island.
How big
how big a to-do it would be, to see if they then wanted to do it at Cumberland Island or not. And but anyway, I listened to all this, and the thing that really, as I said earlier, I love animals, and not ridiculously so, but enough. And they were mentioning this disease called equine infectious anemia, EIA, and they said that they figured that at least a third of the horses would have it and they would be euthanized. And I hate that word. Dead is dead, killing is killing. Euthanasia is this smooth-sounding word that means you're going to kill the animal. And I've had to put down some, dogs and cats that I cried over. But it's still killing, and I always want them to die before I have to do it. But anyway, they were talking, and at the time the park was claiming there were 230 horses over there. Well, I did some quick math and went, good God, that's mass murder. That's a lot. And also, I was upset over the fact that all my life I'd been told that those horses had always been there. They were here when our people came, is what the old folks said. Well, in my family, our people were Welshmen, Scotsmen, and Englishmen. Mama brought a little Swiss in from Newbern, but anyway. And I just thought, this is not right. They're not hurting anybody. They've been there as long as anybody can, as, what does they call it, corporate memory? Mm-hmm. As long as the people can remember. So what's the difference? And then as more newspaper articles occurred, and the articles, I think one of the reporters on Channel 9 said, they were doing all the press on it also, and said that these horses are marooned on a tiny island. Shackleford Banks is 9 miles long. I've walked it. I've walked 8.5 miles of it several times. And they weren't marooned. Maybe at one time, 400 or 500 years ago, they were, but So I just became interested in it, and I didn't like the flavor of what was going on, because everything was downgrading these horses. You know, they're mutts, they're nags, they're on this tiny little island, and we're probably going to kill a third or more of them, and that's okay. And so I started talking to people about it. And the Foundation for Shackleford Horses, which is a long name for a small group that works very hard, came into being because of different people that had the same concern, and with the communities being as small as they are, we found each other. Mm-hmm. And at one point realized that we had to, because government agencies have to listen to the public, but they can shut them off and think about something else, and they don't have to do a thing about what the public tells them or asks them.
But they have to listen.
They have to sit there. They don't even have to listen. They just have to sit there. So, you know, we were going to the meetings, and but we realized that we weren't being heard, because the thought was that we had no quote-unquote power. So we started on that 501c3. Margaret Willis wrote up a lot of that, most of it, and there was a gentleman who had ties to Cedar Island, who's an attorney in Wilmington, Mr. Taylor, who was a corporate attorney, and he wrote up our nonprofit papers for us, and it went through IRS, and we got approved. We got our state corporation papers, and in the meantime, as I've told you, I got a call from Jesse Helms, because we had been writing letters to. I was 52 years old when this started. I had never written a legislator, a president, a governor, even a county official. And that year I wrote all of them and said, help. You know, this is not right. These horses need to be here. They're part of this place. And I came in one day and nearly passed out when I punched my answering machine. I came in from work at Cherry Point, and this voice on my answering machine said, hello, this is Jesse Helms. I got your message, and I'm going to look into this about the horses.
Wow.
And then Jerry Hyatt of Newport, who comes down to this area a lot, knows a lot of people down here, called me one day. I'm still working at the Station Library at Cherry Point. And he said, Carolyn, Congressman Jones is going to be down here at the Holiday Inn in Havelock, and he's meeting with the mayor of Newport. And I've talked the mayor into giving us 5 minutes to talk about the horses.
Wow.
He said, but and in the meantime, since I'm a librarian, because we'd been asked, you know, first question is prove it, show me in writing. I had been going through every book in the station library, and was expanded to doing interlibrary loans out of Chapel Hill and Duke and any place else I could find journal articles or about the horses. And he said, but since you know a little bit more about the history, could you come? And I said, well, okay. So I called my boss and said, you know, such and such day I'm going to need to take a couple hours annual leave and then come on back to work. He said, fine. So on that day, I went over to the Holiday Inn and met Congressman Jones for the first time. And I had also I had made a trip up, because once all the meetings started, I told my husband, I said, there's other horses at Ocracoke and Corolla, and there's a Corolla Wild Horse Fund. I said, I want to go up the banks and talk to these people. And I had gotten Dale Burris's name. Mm-hmm. And so we piled up one day and took the ferries, and we got as far as Ocracoke. And I found a lady. I had seen this article about a woman named Janetta Hennings and her husband Jim, who was a National Park Service ranger. And they were working with Ernie Bowden and some other people, because the herd had gotten so small there. They were concerned it was going to disappear, and they were working on bringing that herd back. And she hand raised a horse that she kept as her own until he died just several years ago. And this was back in the 50s. And named Rainbow.
Rainbow.
And Rainbow was in the Spanish Mustang Registry. and these stories are so interconnected. And I was drifting around here, and I didn't know any of this. I was surprised, too. I just knew the horses had been there long enough. They deserved to be given a chance to stay. So I went up and talked to Janetta, and she gave me some information that she had about them. She had done some research. Very smart lady. About and believed there was a strong Spanish background in these horses, which would put them here before the people, as the old saying went, because we weren't Spanish.
Right. See,
yeah. The first Spaniards were in this area around 1610 to 1615. Mm-hmm. The Englishmen never set foot on Roanoke until 1585. Mm-hmm. So the Spanish beat them here by a good 75 years. And in the meantime, they were flying all up and down these waters and wrecking their ships on the sandbars out here. But anyway, back to Janetta. But I talked to her for almost a day. And she said, have you seen the horses? And I said, no. She said, well, the park's put up like a little grandstand area you can get up on and see them if they're up in the pony pen area. So we drove down there and we climbed up, and I saw a few of them. And she was telling me about how she enjoyed working with them and when her husband was alive. And we went back to her house, and she gave me a copy of a book she wrote called Conquistador's Gold. Oh. It's a paperback they sell down at Ocracoke. And in that, he was talking about these people, and she said, there's a name you need to remember, and it's Lucas Vasquez de Leon. He was a Spaniard. I said, okay, so I wrote it down. And thanked her, and I said, and thank you for taking me up to the pony pen. She said, I'm glad I went. That's the first time I've been since Jim died. So she hadn't been to see the horses since she lost her husband. But anyway, so from there we ventured on to another ferry, and we went to Ocracoke. And I went to the Red and White down there and found Dale Burris sitting behind his desk at the office, and I had, called these people and talked to them and told them what I was interested in. But Dale took me back in the office and told me story after story that I wish I'd had a tape recorder for. Uh-huh. But he said, find yourself a National Geographic magazine, 1926. So I did. And in there's a story called Motor Coaching Through North Carolina.
Yes, wonderful article.
And there's a lot of information about the horses in there. And they call them Raleigh's Little Barbary Ponies and all this in the article, and show just in the photographs across the page, there's no end to the horses in there. And you see these little white things that look like they're sheep, because there are sheep on the banks too, and cattle and goats. And so I got that article and went on from there. He said, and also, he said, you want to get up with the Spanish Mustang Registry? They're out in Oshoda, Wyoming. And they got a banker horse out there. His name's SOS. And he said, I know that because he's the son of a mare off of Shackleford Banks named Scotch Bonnet. And a stallion that belonged to me named Sailor. So SOS had the double meaning of son of Sailor as well as his sea roots. Mm-hmm. And he said the Mustangers came down here, and he said my father was so convinced, Bill Burris was so convinced of the Spanish background of these horses as to explaining the where they came from question, that he did a lot of reading and research, and he said we loaded up Sailor one day in a horse trailer and caught the ferries, and off we went to the Kentucky Horse Park, because they were having a big horse show up there. And he said, we had our own stall and everything. And he said people would look at the different breeds of horses, and he said they were really interested in Sailor. And he said this group of men came up, and they were talking some language we couldn't understand, but they were pointing at the horse and real excited about the horse. And it comes to find out they were Middle Easterners. And they came back and gave him, I don't know if it's some kind of tack, but something, because they liked that horse so much and were so impressed with him. and gave them the impression that it was like, he's one of ours. We know what this horse is.
Wow.
And it could have been Moors. I don't remember exactly, where he said they were from. But that was interesting. And then he told me and Dale was a storyteller. He was really interesting. And he said when it came time for the parade of the breeds, he said he'd had Sailor in there. He said they walked in that arena in and out, back and forth, getting the feel of everything. Before the show, he said when it was time for the show, he said Sailor got right in the entrance, right at the edge of that big arena, and stopped dead. Would not go further. He said so he finally got him turned around and walked him out a little bit and tried to get him back. He wouldn't turn back around. He backed into the arena. And they got a standing ovation. But anyway, and then I went from there, and the most interesting thing too, there was a little country store there, and I don't remember the name of the people that ran the store, but they had the wooden shelves in the store like we used to have when I was a little girl.
In Kentucky now?
No, this is in Ocracoke.
Oh, Excuse me,
we're back to Ocracoke.
Okay, we're back to Ocracoke.
After I left Dale. I guess back to Ocracoke from Hatteras.
Right.
But when the other thing I remember was when I went to that little store, and I told them, I was down here talking to Jeanette about the horses. They started talking about the horses. And one of the men there said that his daddy owned a bunch of horses in Ocracoke. And when they decided they were going to have to, get rid of some of them because of they were putting the highway through. He said, Daddy, they were free grazers. And he said, Daddy didn't have enough land of his own to put the horses he owned on. So he had to do something with them. He said, so we loaded them. We put sides on the boat. And we loaded those horses, ran them, on the ramp. And I don't remember how many trips he said they made, but he said, we took them down, jumped them off at Cedar Island. How about that? And, aside, I'll continue with my journey up the banks, but the other thing I noticed when I was trying to do the research, and I was trying to be very, very, very honest about this, and we were working with Phil Sponenberg up at Virginia Tech Veterinary Medical School. He's a pathologist and a geneticist and writes books on equine horse color. And in coordination with Gus Cothran, who was in at the University of Kentucky, and he was one of the top 2 equine geneticists in the country, if not the world. The other one was the University of California at Davis, and we talked to her too. Ann Bell, and what was her last name? Excuse me, I'll think of it later.
Sure.
But anyway, when we were in that store, he was talking about jumping off at Cedar Island, and then when I would talk to the old people, what I tried to do to find out about the horses, I found Miss Emma D. Willis, and I found Kurt Salter, and I found, of course, Monroe and Wilson Davis, and all these other men that were somewhat younger, had worked with the horses. I found all the people in their 80s and 90s that I could find on Harker's Island to tell me about Shackleford and the horses and the pennons and what they knew about them, because I was a Marshallburger, and it was close for us to go to Corbanks. And I remember a Corbanks pony penning when I was about 5, probably the last one they ever had over there. But my daddy took me. But when I would talk to these people about the horses, one would say, but there was one horse there. He was a red stallion. We called him the Great Marsh Stud, and he'd charge you. He was mean, but so-and-so brought him and put him out there. He wasn't originally of Shackleford. So I'd go find so-and-so. Well, Daddy put him out there. Well, I'd go find Daddy if he was still alive. If he wasn't, I'd ask them, well, do you know where your daddy got him? Yeah, he bought him from so-and-so Willis down at Ocracoke. Well, who cares? He was still an Outer Banks horse.
That's right.
So 99% of the ones that say, but now so-and-so brought him here from somewhere else. When I would track it back through the families, he got him from so-and-so Willis, Ocracoke, or he got him from so-and-so Salter down at Atlantic. Well, they'd come off the banks. Corbanks, they just weren't Shackleford horses before they were put there. And also, you have to remember that Barton's Inlet was cut in 1933 when that San Chiraka, or the big storm. And they called it the drain because that's all it was. It was a little drain of water across on Hortime. high tide. And Miss Emma D told me about being a girl. She was 90-some when I interviewed her. When she was a girl, they would leave their house, their camp on Shackleford on a Saturday night.
You're talking about Miss D. And,
but she said we'd dress up on a Saturday night, and we would we'd go leave our camps on Shackleford and walk over to the lighthouse. And the boys over there had radios and music, and so on a Saturday night we'd walk to the lighthouse and dance.
Oh.
And she said, and that was before I was married.
She had to specify.
Then I got some old pictures from the archives, and she would say, I showed her the pictures and say, Miss Emma D, can you tell me who these people are? She's bright as a tack, like Mama. And she'd look at them and she'd say, yo and so, and she'd say, and that would be so and so. I know him. She said, I used to date him. She said, I've been to dance, but that was before I was married. She keeps saying that before I was married. But she knew all who these men were, involved. So I thought that was interesting with the play between the various islands. And, of course, before Barton's Inlet got cut, they could run from Beaufort Inlet to Ocracoke Inlet without getting their feet very wet.
That's right. Yeah.
Because Swash and all of those were closed in. And Drum Inlet wasn't there.
Right.
So, but anyway, I left Dale and went on up to Corolla and met some of the girls at the Corolla Wild Horse Fund. Debbie Wessler and Regina Dorman.
What was that second name?
Regina Dorman.
Regina Dorman. Okay.
Mm-hmm. She was the current president, I think, of the Corolla Wild Horse Fund. And they have kind of a captive audience up there, which is good for them for fundraising, but they also have a huge disadvantage. Their horses get hit by automobiles.
Yeah.
I haven't heard about that. Well, I have lately. One of the dangers sometimes is teenagers with too many beers and going too fast driving down the beach. But anyway, ours are harder to get to, and as far as fundraising goes, we can't, take people in a Jeep to see the horses, but they're safe. They're safer. Mm-hmm. And Corolla's been asking about getting some Shackleford mares, and we've got to work out where they're going to put them. They got to be way back away from, where some of the herds are.
Right.
But anyway, we talked to them, and they were very helpful. Everybody I talked to was just really nice, loved these horses, and shared all the information they had. Mm-hmm. So that gave me a background to get started when I got back. Mm-hmm. And I had to learn some other things too. I read the English translations of the Spanish histories. I read the Virginia histories. I read the North Carolina histories, because you have to remember that back when the Spanish back in 1585 when the English came, the Spanish were calling from the tip of Florida up past the Chesapeake Bay, Florida. Mm-hmm. The English were calling it Virginia. Mm-hmm. North Carolina, the name didn't come into use until 1663. Mm-hmm. So you've got 100 years, over 100 years of history if you go back to 1515, of this place not even having a name. So when you're reading there was an Englishman that had like a 2-volume translation of Spanish histories, and it was wonderful. But again, you had to remember when it was a Spaniard talking, if he said Virginia, he could be standing on Cape Lookout. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And if it was an Englishman, he'd be calling it Virginia. So once I got all that straight, then the research started to click in. And as I said, it was lucky that I was a librarian, because I knew about interlibrary loans and where to get articles and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
And started writing a paper. Well, in the meantime, the Library of Congress had its 200th anniversary. And they were collecting local legacies. They were collecting stories and histories from areas all over the United States. And different congressmen asked different groups or, people to write these histories, these accounts. And Congressman Jones's office contacted me. Well, I had to get that thing in order, had to get all the footnotes, because basically it's an extremely well documented term paper.
Absolutely, yeah.
Excuse me.
And there again, another politician calling your house.
Mm-hmm.
You're not used to that.
Mm-hmm. No, not at all. And I was not a political animal at all. I listened, I went out and voted, and that was it. But as far as quote playing politics or trying to get, I never did. I just didn't. Wasn't a political animal. But anyway, so I got all this ready. And, of course, I was working at the time, too, and I did most of what I did at night, somewhere between 9 and 3 in the morning. But anyway, I got this paper formatted and all the footnotes in and double-checked and all that, and put it in a notebook with some photographs and did a cover for the notebook. And I had been up, at that point, taking a day off. I remember I had been up 48 hours straight. So I was at I don't know my name stage at that point. But my husband was good enough to drive me to Greenville because they had to have it in the next day. They were going to courier it in. And I slept from Betty to Greenville. I woke up when we pulled into the office and to take it in and give it to Lily. But we got it in there. And so at that point, we had gone from, when we said, but the horses. But we've gone the point of, yes, show me where that's in writing or who said that, to they have a documented history, footnoted, totally, housed in the Local Legacies collection at the Library of Congress.
How about that?
They have arrived.
That's right. There you go.
And then in the meantime, the geneticist, Dr. Cothran at the University of Kentucky, he's now moved to Texas A&M because he's from Texas, was doing a paper and would not let anybody, including the Park Service, who was hiring to have it done, see it before he presented it. And we were going, oh, what does that mean? We knew it meant something. And when he arrived, he said that he had found, I forget if it's 7 or 9. I mean, it's a longer paper, but the gist of it to us was that he had found 7 to 9 variants that related back to colonial Spanish horses. And one of them, which is named Q-AC, is extremely rare because it's easily lost through genetic drift. And he was thrilled to be able to document it in these horses.
Wow.
That's what we said. Plus, we were jumping up and down and squealing and screaming too. It's like, yes. They were here before our people came. Yeah. And so then we had the documented history, which there are some people to whom you'll never be able to prove this.
Right.
Because unless you stumped your toe on something on Shackleford that had D'Allion engraved on it, they'd never believe it.
Right.
Okay, it's not there. No way that could happen. It could happen. But, and there are some people who don't care. We didn't care. We just wanted the horses there. There are also people, and this applies a lot to agencies, to consider anything worth anything, it must have a kind of value added. And to the agency we had to deal with, the history, not as much as the genetics, was the value added. Mm-hmm. And having been a civil servant for 30-some years, a government employee, I also know that before a branch of government destroys anything that belongs to the public, they have to try and make sure that the public perceives it as worthless. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that was what was going on in the beginning, mm-hmm. and that's what upset me mm-hmm. and got me going in this. And my original thought was really that, I'll do what I can here and try to bring it to the attention of people who can do something about it. And then people who know what they're doing will step in and I'll step out. And I'm still here 14 years later. It's something that I don't mind doing. It's a lot of hard physical work because we actually deal with horses. Mm-hmm. But it's also something that consumes your life. My life has not been my own since I went to the first roundup on Shackleford Banks.
Your passion is
but
clearly evident,
it's
and your commitment is very evident.
It's a commitment. It's like, you can't let them down, and they are the most. I've known people that had horses, and I was around their horses, and it was like, they're horses, and they're sweet, and this. But until I got these are so smart, and you're back into that survival of the fittest. The farriers talk about what wonderful feet they have. You're back to survival of the fittest.
Mm-hmm.
A friend of mine who owned a thoroughbred and adopted one of these said that when the farrier came to do his feet the first time, he said, come here, I want to show you what a horse's hoof is supposed to look like. You see, you because horses with bad feet, horses with deformities, horses with, I don't know, intelligence quota lower, they don't make it over there. It's a harsh environment, and and because of that, they're extremely bright horses, and we tell people that are adopted that have and they'll call back a month later and say, "This is the smartest thing I've ever seen." I can't believe this horse. I've got a trainer right now that is having one. We sent him for training because he was an older horse, and a 5-year-old ungentled horse can beat me up.
Oh.
So if they're over 3, we usually get them feeding, and we send them to a trainer, and they use ramekin methods. They don't rope them and hog tie them and throw them down and all that stuff. And the trainer worked with him, and a friend of his on a neighboring farm who does hunter-jumper saw him. And the trainer we sent him to called and said, this friend of mine wants to work with him for a couple of weeks in hunter-jumper, no charge to you. I said, wonderful. Let her go. You might win a prize somewhere.
Cool.
But like I said, that's basically how it came to be. In the meantime, the stars got aligned because Congressman Jones, we were also sending him photographs and sending him information like the history paper and running to answer any question he had. And he introduced the Shackleford Banks Wild Horses Protection Act, and 2 things happened there. First of all, there's an act going to protect the horses, but the management plan was at full tilt. They rounded up the horses. They found that 41% of them tested positive for equine infectious anemia. They hauled them off the banks at night. We were on Harker's Island watching the big tractor lights go up and down the dunes as they loaded them into the trailers and took them to the landing bars to bring them back. We went over they were going to bring them out the next night. And they did. They had these huge stock trailers, which are like horse trailers, or cattle trailers, but they've got these slots in the top that you can see inside. Mm-hmm. And they had 2 of those huge cattle car things packed with horses off Shackleford. And there were a number of people down there. I mean, it was just as cold blowing off that water. And I happened to be standing, I was between Anita Kimball, and on the right was a man I know not well, but knew. He's dead now. Bobby Leroy Hancock was standing beside me. And when they started those big trucks up, there were lights on overhead in those trailers. And I looked at Anita and said, my God, they've got every flaxen maned horse on the island in there. It seemed like all of them had blonde manes, most of them. Mm. And I turned to the right and looked at Bobby Leroy. And when those trucks pulled out, tears were running down his face. And I lost it. I had to leave to see a grown man cry. Mm. But anyway, they were the bad times. And I said one of the biggest shockers before they did that bringing off, we went over there. We found out that there were state vet license plates all over Harker's Island. Or state license plates. We figured it was state vets. And Anita called me and she said, there's some staying right across from my house. Something's going on. And the grapevine down here is better than the grapevine's faster than a fax machine.
There you go. Or email.
Yeah, or email. Faster than email. But anyway, the word had spread, so we called each other and decided to get together and go over to Harker's Island. We called Monroe Paler because he had a boat. PD was going somewhere. And said, can you take us to Shackleford in the morning? We think something's going on. We think they're getting ready to round these horses up. Of course, we had been told by the superintendent of the park that we would be informed. We weren't informed. So we got in his boat, and he said, well, where do you think we ought to go? Well, I'd been walking up and down it for for several months just taking pictures of the horses, because one of the things being said was that there was no grass. Well, I took pictures of them to their shoulders in grass over there. There's some areas of that island there aren't any grass on their sand dunes. But anyway, and to get pictures of the shape of the horses, what condition they were in. So he said, where do you want to go? I said, well, let's go down to the horse pen. That's an easy place to land. When we got over there, we saw boats, and we went on up. And there were all these people, and they were setting up leads and pins and panels. And one gentleman said, can I help you all? And I said, yes, Dr. Earl Shepherd over here. He's a state vet. Wonderful man that I had been talking to on the phone about the horses, about EIA, actually. And he came over and introduced himself, and I asked him when the horses were going to ride up. He said, in the morning. So we thanked him and left, and the next morning we went back, and there were 4 of us: Anita Kimball, Margaret Willis, Wilson Davis, me, I guess 5 of us, and Monroe. And we were wading ashore from the boat in our hip boots, hanging on to the tops of our hip boots. And when we got up there's a little step up by the horse pen out of the water up onto the bank, just 6 or 8 inches high. And there were posts and a rope across there. And this I will never forget till I die. There was a National Park Service ranger, National Park, civilian employee paid by the taxpayer, walking back and forth up and down that road with his jacket thrown behind the butt of his weapon. And that was for us. I'll never forget that. And
it's hard to believe.
I grew up with the image of Smokey the Bear.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see guns with citizens.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was those days. Thank God had passed. It was a long time ago. But Dr. Shepherd in the meantime came up. They were bringing some horses up the east, and he saw us and said, "Carolyn, y'all come on over here." So we ignored the rope, ignored the gun, climbed across and climbed up on the hay bales that they had over there so we could see what was going on. And we watched the roundup of the horses.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that night after we left, it was when they were trailing them down to put them on the landing barge. And they took them up to Clinton and took them to a livestock arena there. Jerry Hyatt went up there, bless his heart. And we gave him a cell phone. He didn't have one then. And he said, I'm going up there because there was talk that they might send them back. We were looking for an island to put them on, to quarantine them. And also trying to learn about EIA at the same time, just as hard as we could from everybody. And that's how we got to know Dr. Chuck Issel. He is the top EIA guy in the world. He was at the time. And he was at University of Kentucky, Wright Markey Professor of Equine Genetics. Whoa. And anyway, well, we dealt with them, but the first thing we found out was we realized that when we opened our mouths, it meant nothing. So, because we weren't credible. Some of us had degrees, but they weren't in the right area. And so it was a matter of, we're paying attention to you. So what we did was we came to my house and we would crawl up on those bar stools in there. And with the internet, we'd look up these guys and these university, and we would find through internet research who was basically the top guy in this area. We called Dan Rubenstein at Princeton, who'd been studying those horses for 25 years. We called Phil Spangenberg at Virginia Tech Veterinary Medical School in Blacksburg, who is an expert on colonial Spanish horses. We called Dr. Gus Kaufman, who was, and the lady out at Ann Bolden, I believe was her name, out at University of California at Davis, who were the top equine geneticists in the country, and if not the world. Who else did we call? Dr. J. Kirkpatrick, Zoo Montana and Billings. He's written a book he studied for years the horses up at Assateague. And he has a book called Into the Wind. And in that book, he says that the oldest horses recorded, written about were on Shackleford Banks in the 1500s.
How about that?
And so and when we would call and say we're talking about the Shackleford horses, number one, most of the time they answered their own phones, which shocked me as bad as Jesse Helms calling my house. And number two, they're teachers to the bone. Mm-hmm. It was, yes, how may I help you? But they knew who these horses were. These equine scientists knew they were here, even though a lot of, general people might not have. And they helped us. They answered questions. It's been like being, not so much in the last couple of years, but before that, it was like being in grad school for 8 or 10 years.
How about that?
Because we would ask them questions and they would answer them in word until we could understand it and explain it back. Because what we found we had to do is we would go to a meeting and make a statement about the horses. And again, you get, who told you that? And when I said Dan Rubenstein,
Princeton.
Yeah, Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology, Princeton University. Or Jake Kirkpatrick, head of conservation biology at Zoo Montana and Billings, or any of the rest in their titles. That wasn't Carolyn Mason to Betty. That was them speaking, and the Park Service had nobody and still has nobody qualified to argue with these guys.
How about that?
So we became parrots, and that's how we did it.
Wow. Because
the other thing that broke my heart, too, is that the local people at that point in time were so disregarded. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It was like we talked funny, we were idiots. But I find out where some of the personnel were from, and they should have been ashamed of themselves. But anyway, without mentioning any names.
Right.
But it was just a total disregard of the local people of having any value. By God, it's our home.
Right.
Our folks were down here fighting the mosquitoes and the storms before they ever heard of the Crystal Coast.
Right.
And it doesn't mean it's mine, but it means my heart's here. And I like these people, and there's a bad apple in every barrel down here, just like anywhere else.
Right.
But that's irrelevant.
Right.
And I resented a government agency, being a civil service employee myself, I resented a government agency treating people the way they were treated at that time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and the horses were shaped by their environment, and their environment shaped the horses, and that's just what happens with our communities, our culture here, and so we all kind of grew up together,
We did, but the isolation fascinates me. I remember when I was in high school at Smyrna, when we had basketball games. As soon as a kid opened their mouth, I knew if they were from Atlantic or Harkers Island. Mm-hmm. There was just enough difference in the brogue that you could pick up where they were from. Mm-hmm. And I think that is so fascinating.
Yeah.
And yet, my grandmama used to tell me about how they go visiting. She had people in Williston and Davis, and they'd do the horse and cart thing, and they go visiting to their relatives. So they were switching about, but you could still have that distinct flavor of the difference in the various communities around here. Yeah, and of course, Betty, where I'm living now, they were farmers.
Yeah,
they grew cabbage and farmed and did stuff like that.
Taters.
But from Smyrna, right to Marshallburg and Harkers Island, and hang a left and right on down to Cedar Island were fishermen.
Oh yeah,
mostly.
Yeah,
and good ones too.
There you go.
And the life-saving service was. That's when those men would take a boat. Can you imagine, in a hurricane, taking a dinghy and oars?
And rowing out to
the Coast Guard's got these boats now that will go in those storms, and they'll right themselves if they turn over.
Right.
They were in a dinghy with oilskins on and oars, and they go to ships to rescue people.
Right. That's
when men were men.
Tough men, I'll tell you that.
That's right.
Well, this is an important part of our culture, and our community has a lot to thank you and Shackleford Horses for. That's the truth.
Well, we didn't do it by ourselves.
I
have to talk. The reason I am seen so much is because nobody else wants to talk in public, and I don't know any better.
But see, it's that commitment, though, Carolyn, that makes it. That makes you the leader in this movement to save the horses, And I don't want you to not say anything about your family and how supportive they've been of you, because I know PD, your husband, and your family, they've had to sacrifice you a little bit.
They have, and they've been very supportive. I have been fussed at upon occasion.
Yeah.
Because of something that was going to happen, and I say, I can't. I have to finish this.
Mm-hmm.
One to the comical side of it, I retired at Cherry Point. I had worked at Luzerne for 20 years, finished up at Cherry Point. And I remember the day I drove out the front gate. I had signed out, and I was retired. And when I drove out that gate, I said out loud to my steering wheel, "Thank God, no more government paperwork." And what did I do but get tangled up with the National Park Service? So my dining room it looks like a paper mill exploded in it. And that's actually the hardest part of it. Like I said, there's physical labor because in the last couple of years, we have always had 4 times as many requests for adoptions when we bring the horses off. Mm-hmm. And that's done by genetics, not a bunch of local yokels going eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Mm-hmm. Because Catherine has seen the genetics on them before we ever touch them. Mm-hmm. And, but, you know, we always would have, if we had 12 horses, we'd have 60 or 70 applications. Always, until the stock market flew out from under itself, right. You know. And everything shut down. And I had gotten emails and phone calls. Oh, because we had about 6 horses. We had brought some off that year and had gotten them gentled down to the point. We don't train them. We get them to the point. I lead them around with my finger in their halter and kiss and hug on them all. We kiss our horses. And so once we've got them at that point, we'll let them be adopted out to the public. And for a $600 adoption fee that goes straight back to the nonprofit, because we're all volunteers and have never had any salaries. But anyway, I sent out 40. Between Anita sent some out too. She got some phone calls. She's actually our adoption coordinator, and with Joy Lawrence. And so between us, we sent out 40 application papers. The more you heard on the news about the Dow and the stock market and the money being gone and the banks ready to fail, I got 1 application back. So, and we have adopted 3 or 4 horses since then, but I have 7 out here right now that need to be adopted. And if they stay here another year, I'm going to have to adopt all of them, because you get so attached to them. They're so very bright and funny. I swear they have a sense of humor. They're down Easters because they got a sense of humor, and it's a real dry one. They'll do things that when it finally dawns on you what they're doing, just cracks you up, and they'll look up and look at you with almost a sparkle in the eye. They know they're funny. So, maybe that's where we got it.
They know they're funny.
Yeah, they do. They know they're funny. They'll look right up at you like that.
Well, listen, I don't want to end this without you telling the story that you told me when I first came in about how you felt about what was happening in the Gulf with the oil spill, and what you did.
I was horrified when I saw what was happening down there. I was angered because I felt like, and I get angry with reporters. Whatever happened to Edward R. Murrow and some of those guys that, Huntley and Brinkley and those that ask sensible questions. I think it's gotten to the point where there's 24-hour news. They've just got to have something to say, and some of it's idiotic. Mm-hmm. And they don't ask the right questions. They take whatever's given them and get right in front of that camera, looking pretty as they always do, and spout this garbage out. But, in my mind, the dispersants upset me because, number one, they're poison. They're toxic. And all they do is hide it. And so I'm sitting there thinking, well, I guess they figure that, stupid as we are, if we don't see it, we won't be upset. But it's still out there. So, and then there was a newspaper article, it may have been News Observer, that had just a little blip about, if that oil hit certain currents around Florida, and that we could see tar balls on the North Carolina coast, tar balls as early as August or September. And we even, I talked to Sue Stuska, who was the park person over there now, and deals with the horses, Dr. Stuska, about some things we could do, because we're thinking, like, all right, they've got digs along the shore. We might have to put water containers over there and do the joint and the point, because of the freshwater lens. You can dig 3 feet and hit fresh water on Shackleford and pump water for them for a while. Or, we were just thinking of various things we might have to do.
Trying to troubleshoot.
If some contamination got up here. Hopefully, if they, our number one suggestion is put everything you can from the outside of that inlet to the inside of that inlet, because if it doesn't come in the inlets, it can't get in the marshes.
That's right. That's right.
So these barrier islands really are a big help. And like I said, I would put row after row after row after row after whatever it took. It just blocked the inlets for a while to keep it out of here. But anyway, we were kind of concerned about that. And I wanted to let somebody know that, because a lot of people felt like I did. I know they did. And particularly all the, the fishing families and the people who live near, play in, or work in the water would feel that way. And I said, I feel like writing the president, but he'd never get it. I mean, like, he's not busy right now with all that going on. So I thought, well, I had remembered a news conference that he was having, and a reporter asked him something about the oil spill, and he said, I wake up to it every morning, I go to sleep with it every night. He said, my daughter, I don't know if it's the older one,
Malia.
I don't remember, may have been Malia, he said he was shaving, and she poked her head in and said, Daddy, have they plugged the hole yet? And I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll write Michelle and give her some information, and she'll show it to those youngins, and they'll keep him straight. So Bob Vogel, whom everybody loved, was here a few years ago. While he was here, the National Park Service did a DVD called Ribbon of Sand. And as if the job wasn't well enough done, they got managed to get Meryl Streep to narrate it. Well, that was it, award winner. But it is beautiful. And I was at one of the first showings. I was invited to go. And there's a line in there where she says, and when I die, in that smooth voice she has, and when I die, I want to become part of the salt marsh. There was not a dry eye in that room if they were born anywhere near Carteret County. But anyway, it's such a beautiful thing. And, showed the various parts of the Outer Banks, the Pocosin swamps, a little bit inland, and says, you have egrets and this and wild horses, and there's a shot of one of ours there. But I said, I want to send her a copy of Ribbon of Sand, and actually got a new one from Sue. I bought probably 15 when it first came out, and I sent them to Walter Jones and Beverly Perdue. Bev's got a copy. And she was one of the first ones that spoke up for the horses, too. One of the first ones we contacted. She actually wrote a letter to Walter Jones.
Great.
But anyway, back to the Obamas, I wrote this letter to the First Lady, just told her that I lived along the coast and was watching that with great concern, and understood the tragedy that could occur there, as well as those people are not frightened because they're losing their livelihood. Their hearts are broken, basically, because of what's happening to this beautiful place. And told her about the background of the DVD, and told her that to be thinking about everybody, and that I hope she had time to sit down and watch it with her girls. And I mailed it. Well, yesterday I got a thank you note from the White House. So I'm going to frame it, because not everybody has a little envelope that says, the White House, Washington, D.C. in the corner. And I told my husband, I said, well, it's a standard thank you thing, but they both signed it, and it's gotten at least as far as the social secretary.
There you go.
There you go.
And I think that's just wonderful, and it just proves the point of how dedicated and passionate you are about things.
And if they've got time for one more thing, there's some people, because like I said, no way I did this by myself. I would sit down in Easter, they didn't like me. But as I think I mentioned briefly before, the stars run wild. We wrote the letters and made phone calls. Beverly Perdue The first copy of anything I have is a letter from Beverly Perdue to Congressman Walter Jones. She was a Democratic senator then. He's a Republican congressman, saying, look into this. I can't believe that the park is upsetting our local friends like they are. Let's see what's happening with these horses. Jesse Helms from the phone call, hello, this is decided to get in on the act. Congressman Joe, it eventually came to the point that he introduced the Shackleford Banks Wild Horses Protection Act. The entire North Carolina delegation was behind it. Governor Jim Hunt, a Democratic governor, wrote Republican Congressman Walter Jones and said, thank you so much. These are a part of this state, and thank you for introducing this legislation. Governor Hunt also wrote President Bill Clinton and said, these are important to North Carolina. I've got copies of all those letters too. Yeah. And then the vote came, and it went. And when you think about the gravity of it and how democracy can work, there's this 9 mile long island off the coast of North Carolina with a few wild horses on it. And when it went before the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C., that legislation passed by a vote of 416 to 6. Wow. And if you look at the Federal Register, the Congressional Record, Senator Cuban, a lady from Wyoming, and one of the Kennedys, which one I can't remember right now, both stated for the record that had they been there, they would have voted A. Wow. Yes. All right. It passed. Jesse Helms grabbed it out of the, and brought it through the Senate, and it went up to the White House. And who is standing beside Bill Clinton telling him to sign that thing but Erskine Bowles, another North Carolinian. So I said it's like the stars were aligned for that thing to pass and get up there. And once that passed, it was a whole new ball game. Wow. And it was very cleverly done because it wasn't just thrown out there as some little standalone piece of legislation. What that bill says is go to the establishing legislation of Cape Lookout National Seashore. Go down to paragraph number so-and-so and insert. The Secretary shall allow a herd of free-roaming wild horses on Shackleford Banks. He changed their mission.
Right.
And also having been a government employee, and working with the Marine Corps,